Today's sponsor is Powerschool. Stay tuned at the end of the show to learn more about their free K-12 Academic Leaders webinar series. All 4's and 5's Secrets to AP Teaching Success, Episode 359.
The 10-Minute Teacher Podcast with Vicki Davis. Every weekday, you'll learn powerful, practical ways to be a more remarkable teacher today.
AP classes. Some folks love them. Some folks know we got to do them and they're difficult. And, some folks don't like them too much. But today we're going to talk to Andrew Sharos, an educator from Illinois. And his book is All 4's and 5's, A Guide to Teaching and Leading Advanced Placement Programs. And it's interesting, before the show we were talking, and Andrew says he's gotten some feedback that he should have just written it about all teaching. So this is definitely something that can apply to all of us. Andrew, what do you do when you're talking to an AP teacher and they say, my scores just aren't high enough?
Yeah, well, it's an all too familiar situation. Everybody is kind of in this race against each other and other students around the country to try to gain college credit and get the experience along the way that we want to give to our students. So there's plenty of us out there that are hoping for better, whether we're getting all 4's and 5's or whether we're struggling to get any of our kids to pass. But I think an AP test is competitive. This is a kind of a competitive arena. And I think, the teachers have to want to compete, and their teammates sort of in this game of passing this test at the end of the year are their students. So that team is working together, the teacher and the students, to try to achieve a good outcome at the very end. And so I think a lot of it really comes down to building a culture of success in your classroom, that kids are competing for good scores, but it's the right competition.
Okay. So when you say competing, the AP program doesn't say, we can only have a certain number of 4's and 5's. You're just saying competing against themselves so they can get that level of excellence. Is that what you're saying?
I think AP classes are different because the curriculum is standardized not only across the country, but, at these American schools across the world. So we're all working from the same sheet of music. And so, like students will eventually compete for college entry or compete for jobs one day. The student at my school has to compete against the perceived better student at the school down the street. So because everything is normed, and you're right, Vicki, like there isn't a set number of 4's and 5's that are given out. But I think the mentality of us, all of us, right, the teacher and the students against the test is something that we really try to cultivate in our students, so that it's not us versus each other or the kids versus the teacher, but it's all of us kind of doing this work to achieve something at the end of the year.
Well, that's a great way to take a look at that. Andrew, you've been teaching this for a while, and perhaps there were some simple things you learned early on that really made a difference in your AP scores. What were those things?
I think one is that AP kids care about their grades a lot. Most of our students care about their grades a lot, but we know as teachers, like, our goals are a lot different in the 184 days that we have them. So one of our goals is to walk out, that they learn something in our class. Another one might be that they're getting the skills and the readiness for college, that they become lifelong learners, that they love the content. You can take all of those goals and kind of leverage the fact that teachers don't care about their grades. They care about giving the students the skills and the motivation in order to do well. I know that kids care about their grades. So that's one way that we can kind of structure the class to get students to do what we want them to do, right? Like, the best advice you could ever give another teacher is get the kids to do what you want them to do. And if you can figure out that by leveraging their grades, building relationships, forming the structure, we are good enough at planning for a set curriculum where we can help the kids cross the finish line and be successful.
Now, what are those things that you talk about in this book that are just good teaching?
Well, I'd start first with relationships. I've heard you talk about, the importance of this before and focusing on your students' strengths. And one of the things that AP teachers, and I think all teachers can be guilty of, are they look first towards the weaknesses in their students, right? The things that they can't do. And you've mentioned this before, like how you like to focus on your students' strengths. One of the ways we do that, I think, is approaching every student in the classroom like it's almost an IEP in special education. The way that the teacher interacts with this kid might be different than they have to react to the kids sitting behind them. The love and care and time and concern that I put into one student who's probably smarter than me and is going to get a 4 or 5 with or without me is going to be a lot different than the student who maybe was a stretch to enroll in your class or even get up out of their house and get to school that day. If we look at that really individualized and building relationships, I think we start to carve out that IEP that specific student needs to be successful.
Yes, of course, we have to relate before we educate, as I repeat very often, because it really does start with relationships.
You bet. And that pendulum has swung, right? Like we're coming out of this time period of you need to be friendly and not friends with kids, and you need to do everything with the door open just to make sure you cover yourself. And I feel now we're in an age where we're all being pushed to reach out, to find out who our kids are, to validate their culture, to find their strengths and play off of those. And I'm really happy to kind of see that pendulum now shift back towards relationships.
Yeah, because that's where it belongs. That's for sure. Okay, you talk to teachers about relationships, figuring out their strengths. What's next? Because, isn't there a certain way that questions are asked? Doesn't it require a lot of critical thinking and some different thinking, perhaps, than you use in your regular high school classes?
Yeah, there's no question. I think the structure relates to your homework policy, your quizzing policy, how you grade papers. Do you offer extra credit, and how you evaluate student writing? I think for homework, it has to be consistent, but it has to be valuable. So many students don't see the value in what you're asking them to do. So everything you give for homework has to be for, something that they might need for the test or that will build a skill for the test. I like a quiz policy where you can formally assess your students anytime, anywhere. How do you get kids to do their homework? They care about their grades. So you give them a pop quiz every day for a week, every other day for a month, maybe not for a month straight. But the point is that it's open anytime, right? Like they're responsible for their learning at all times. I think we waste a ton of time grading papers, putting a bunch of red ink on papers only to see kids go to the back page and see what kind of grade they got, right? Because kids care about their grades. And I think that sitting down and doing writing conferences with kids, even if it's for 5 or 10 minutes on a few assignments throughout the year, will not only make your family happy because you don't come home with stacks of homework and papers to do, but I think the conversation you can have with students in 5 or 10 minutes, elbow to elbow in a kid's desk, sitting next to them, is so much more valuable than anything we can give them, written. So I try to be really personalized with feedback for students on their writing.
Okay, and strategic about the writing.
For sure. I think having students work written or read aloud is really important for them to hear because, we're the readers, right? And eventually the readers are going to be somebody in San Antonio grading their test, and students have to understand how that sounds when they phrase something this way, or how that looks when they put punctuation in this spot, or what type of argument I'm actually getting from their writing. So you can't do that with pencil and paper, I would argue. You can only do that through something really personal. And I found that half of those writing conferences, again, really just feed into building relationships because the conversation isn't always about their writing.
Okay, so many of us hate test prep, but let's say you're a month before the AP test and you're going to give the pep up, bring it home for the Gipper type speech, right? You're about to tell them what they need to do to prep. What does that speech sound like?
So can I address the first part of what you said first?
Sure.
Standardized tests get a bad rap, and we all know why, and maybe with good cause. But these are pretty good tests. They're normed. They ask a lot of students to produce skills and critical thinking and things that they will take with them beyond the test. And so the advantages of teaching kids how to think and teaching kids how to write and teaching kids how to argue and be responsible citizens and all of that discipline that goes with it, AP class or not. If a student can score a 3, 4, or 5 on one of these tests at the end of the year, couldn't you argue that they got all of those other things along the way? So I think the culture of your class is not just, all right, we got a month left, we got to really bust it to get to the finish line. It happens on day one, so they know that what they're doing has a purpose. There are advantages and a Super Bowl at the end of the year that you can take something like college credit, money saved, skill building along the way. So we put a countdown on the board. We pass a WWE belt around for the highest score in the class. You have to build that culture throughout the year so that students understand that the experience in your class means something.
Wow. So your speech happens at the beginning of the year.
It's day one. The book drops on the floor. And if you're not prepared to read every word of this book and follow this journey with me, then maybe you're in the wrong class. Like, I think that you have to set your expectations early, knowing there's so much at stake, whether it's an AP class or not, because we care so much about the journey that kids have And we have such a finite amount of time to accomplish all the things that we want to do as teachers, during the school year.
Well, and the thing I like about it, because of course there's a lot of debate about AP or not AP, and some people are like, oh, just go ahead and do the college credit. But because it's normed and it's across the world, to me, I have found in my experience that AP tends to have more credibility with many high quality colleges. And we're not going to get into that debate because I know there are a lot of folks who really disagree with that. My own kids, AP was harder than just college credit classes.
Well said. And I think the phrase that I try to use a lot is that dual credit courses equal college credit, but AP courses equal college credit and college readiness. And so often we focus on the first part because I teach 80% free and reduced lunch population, 85% Hispanic population, a lot of first generation college goers. And yes, we want the college credit opportunity, but we know there's a variety of different ways to get that now in 2018. And I'd argue that through the College Board's AP program, there is a really good way to gain college readiness, right? And it's taking these classes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So we want to finish up. You get these AP teachers. Now, it's a lot of pressure because the AP teachers are measured by success, so some AP teachers take the approach of, I'm going to go ahead and get them not to take the class if they can't pass, right? And some kids who are kind of borderline and miss that opportunity just because the AP teacher is afraid. What do you say to AP teachers about this pressure and how you handle it?
Well, I think one of the measuring sticks that has been pretty commonplace is your pass rate. I had 60% of my kids pass. I had 100% of my kids pass. That is more of a function of how many kids you have. So one of the numbers I think we value the most is how many kids passed. So the more kids you welcome into your culture, the more recruiting you do for these rigorous classes, the more students you're going to get to take your class. And that's just a better chance to increase the number of kids passing. So for anyone that's frustrated about, their results, I would say first to, take a mirror and look at the culture that you've created in your class, and is it conducive to high achievement? Do you have goals with your students? And then second, value any gain or growth you can make in number of kids passing. Because even if, 2 kids passed the exam this year, that might be 1 or 2 more than passed last year. And I think that's something we should celebrate.
Well, what do you say to the teacher that has a 100% pass rate? Does that make you wonder if they don't encourage the kids who might be borderline?
Well, I would argue then we have to look at how we're identifying students for these classes. If your pass rate's at 100%, in my experience, I've seen your enrollment is not reflective of your student population, either demographically or, by their test scores or achievement rates. And we've got to try to find more kids from the middle and push them into this environment to challenge themselves.
I think that's an important piece to look at because there is a balance there.
For sure.
So we are going to do a giveaway. Now, it's going to be a little different, and Andrew's going to give away 3 books. His book, All 4's and 5's, A Guide to Teaching and Leading Advanced Placement Programs. Andrew, you want me to describe how to do this?
Let's do it. I want to hear it.
All you have to do is to go and leave a review on iTunes of the 10-Minute Teacher. You need to mention Andrew Sharos, that's Sharos, and his show. You need to also include your Twitter handle. We're going to give it about 2 weeks after this show goes live, and then we're going to go and look at all those names, put them in a hat, as Dr. Lisa Durf often does for me, and we will pull 3 of you out of the hat. Now, if you don't do Twitter, you can, of course, leave us an Instagram handle or some other handle that we can reach you, or you can email, Lisa at coolcatteacher.com and say, hey, I'm the person who left this particular review, and we can go from there. So, Andrew, thanks for the book giveaway, and I'm excited to pass this on to my son's AP U.S. history teacher.
I am thankful and humbled to be on. Thank you so much, Vicki.
Check out Powerschool's Academic K-12 Leader Series, including the upcoming webinar on best practices for a balanced assessment system. You can also access the on-demand webinars, including Deeper Learning, Harnessing the Power of Collective Efficacy, Understanding the Change in Learners and the Secret to Personalization, and then also My Digital Dozen, Cool Cat Teacher's 12 Tips for Building Your Digital Classroom. Just go to coolcatteacher.com/Powerschool webinar and learn more about this series and the Powerschool Unified Classroom. Powerschool is the only SIS and LMS that I recommend. Thank you for listening to the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast. You can download the show notes and see the archive at coolcatteacher.com/podcast. Never stop learning.